In the colourful and peaceful village of Mabenga, life flowed gently like the river that ran through it. The sound of drums echoed in the distance, children's laughter filled the air, and the smell of roasted maize drifted from small clay homes. People lived in harmony, waking up to the beauty of the sunrise and going to sleep under a sky full of stars. In this cheerful setting, everyone knew one woman, Kadia. She was not just beautiful, but kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and full of grace. Her hands created magic with raffia threads, weaving mats that even traders from far-off lands came to buy. Her smile was warm, and her spirit gentle, like morning dew on fresh leaves. Kadia lived in a small clay house on the edge of the forest, where birds sang and wildflowers bloomed. Many villagers admired her and often said she was blessed, especially because she was married to Demotsi, a man from a powerful family, the son of the former village chief, and now one of the respected councilmen. He wore fine clothes, gave speeches at village gatherings, and walked with pride through the marketplace. To outsiders, he seemed like the perfect husband. People often whispered that Kadia was lucky to be with a man like him, but what they didn't know was that behind the walls of that clay house, a very different story was unfolding. What looked like a perfect marriage from the outside was hiding a dark secret. Demotsi, the man everyone praised, was not the same person when no one was watching. The smile he showed the villagers disappeared at home. His voice, once calm in the council meetings, turned into thunder inside his house. While people clapped for him in public, his wife silently suffered in private. Kadia tried to hide her pain behind her gentle smile. She never told anyone what was happening, because in her heart, she believed things would get better. She believed love could change a man. But every day her heart grew heavier. The love that once brought her joy slowly turned into chains that held her down. Her raffia mats lost their colours, her laughter faded, and her eyes began to hold a quiet sadness. No one in Mabenga could see what was happening inside that house. They saw Demotsi's powerful image, but never saw Kadia's quiet cries. The same village that danced under the stars had no idea that one of their own was living in fear and pain. And so, the story began, not with screams or shouts, but with a silent suffering hidden behind a beautiful door. But little did Demotsi know, the same children who played in the yard, the same innocent eyes he ignored, were the ones who would soon rise and change everything. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream for Kadia. Demotsi was sweet and gentle. He would surprise her with baskets full of wild berries, sing old village love songs under the stars, and pull her close to dance in the moonlight. He held her hand like she was the most precious gift in the world. Kadia believed she had found true love, a man who saw her heart, respected her dreams, and cherished her presence. But everything started to change the moment Demotsi's father passed away. He stepped into his father's shoes as a village councilman, and with that power came pride, heavy, cold pride that changed the man Kadia once loved. The gentle words turned into sharp commands. The warm hugs turned into cold shoulders. He no longer saw Kadia's weaving as a beautiful talent, but mocked it as a useless distraction. He began to control everything, what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, even when she could speak. Kadia tried to hold on to hope. When their first child, Tunai, was born, she thought the joy of fatherhood would soften Demotsi's heart again. For a short while, it seemed like a light had returned, but it didn't last. His anger grew stronger with time. Every small thing Kadia did became a reason for him to raise his voice or slam his fist against the table. Her raffia mats, once symbols of beauty and peace, were now torn and thrown aside during his outburst. He accused her of disrespecting him, of trying to overshadow him in the village, even when all she did was stay silent and try to keep peace. When their second child, Ziba, arrived, the tension only worsened. Demotsi didn't come home with fruits anymore. He came home with fury. He didn't sing anymore. He shouted. He didn't dance with her anymore. He barely even looked at her. And Kadia, the once radiant woman of Mabenga, started shrinking into herself. Her voice became softer. Her laughter disappeared. She carried heavy silence on her shoulders. By the time their third child, Jomo, was born, Kadia had become an expert at hiding pain. Her smiles were painted on, and her bruises were hidden behind long sleeves. She spoke gently, moved carefully, and prayed silently. But inside, she was breaking. Her dreams of a happy home, of love, of respect, had turned into a nightmare. She no longer looked at Demotsi with love. She looked at him with fear. And though she wanted to scream, she stayed silent, for the sake of her children, not knowing that those same children were watching, listening, and slowly understanding more than she ever thought they would. In the eyes of the village, Chief Demosi was a man of honor and wisdom. He wore flowing robes, spoke with confidence, and often stood at the front of council gatherings, preaching about unity, peace, and family values. He resolved village disputes with calm words and wise gestures. People bowed in respect when he passed. Young men wished to be like him, and elders praised his leadership. He had built a perfect mask for the world to see, a mask of dignity and virtue. But that mask slipped the moment he stepped through his front door. Behind closed doors, he was not the wise chief the village admired. He was a storm, loud, cruel, and frightening. Inside that clay house, the man who preached peace was a man who only knew violence. Kadia lived each day walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger his temper. But no matter how carefully she moved, it was never enough. One misplaced bowl, one extra pinch of salt in the soup, one forgotten chore, anything could light his fire. Demosi's anger came like thunder. He would slap her without warning, scream at her until the walls shook, and throw plates across the room. Her arms bore bruises from being grabbed too hard. Her face wore forced smiles that tried to hide the pain. Sometimes he would punch the walls instead of her, but the fear was always the same. His voice roared louder than any drumbeat, and the echoes of his rage became the lullaby in their home. Even then, Kadia never complained to anyone. She swallowed her pain, wore her scarf tighter to hide the bruises, and told neighbors she had slipped or bumped into something. She protected his image, thinking maybe things would change, thinking she was doing it for the sake of peace, for her children's future. But the truth was, every time she stayed silent, she allowed the monster to grow. What she didn't realize was that her children, Tunai, Ziba, and little Jomo, were not blind. They saw the fear in her eyes. They heard her muffled cries in the night. They watched their father transform from a village hero into a terrifying figure at home. The same hands that held the village staff of honor had once yanked their mother by the arm. The same voice that guided the village had cursed their mother in front of them. And while Kadia tried to protect them from the truth, her children were silently gathering it. Each bruise, each scream, each broken bowl, they remembered it all. They didn't say a word, but their little hearts were filled with confusion, anger, and pain. And slowly, deep inside them, something began to stir, a quiet voice whispering that the truth could not stay buried forever. Kadia's pain became a silent storm that followed her every day. Each morning, she wore her smile like a mask, but behind it, her heart was drowning. At night, when the village slept and the house was quiet, she cried softly into her pillow, letting her tears soak the bedsheets while she whispered broken prayers to the ancestors. She asked for strength, for peace, for a sign, anything that would bring back the love that had vanished from her home. She tried everything to fix what was broken. She visited the elders in secret, hoping for advice. They told her to be patient, to submit more, to be a good wife. So she tried harder. She cooked his favorite meals, praised his every word, and bent her back just to keep peace. She even went to Mama Olake, the wise village herbalist, who gave her special herbs and performed cleansing rituals to restore harmony in the home. Kadia followed every instruction with hope in her heart, but nothing changed. The herbs couldn't soften a heart already poisoned by power and pride. Instead of love, she got insults. Instead of peace, she got pain. Demosi twisted her mind with cruel words. He told her she was useless, that she brought bad luck, that her beauty meant nothing. Slowly, Kadia began to believe him. She questioned herself, doubted her worth, and wondered if she truly was the problem. His manipulation broke her spirit in ways no bruise ever could. Her confidence faded, her eyes lost their shine, and she started to move like a ghost in her own home. But even in her darkest days, one thing gave her strength: her children. Tunai, Jomo, and little Sewa were the light that kept her from falling completely into despair. They were too young to understand everything, but they saw their mother's pain, and they loved her deeply. They would pick wildflowers from the fields and surprise her with tiny bouquets. They would wrap their little arms around her waist and whisper, "Mama, we love you more than the stars." Those simple words were like healing balm on her wounds. Kadia held on to those moments, when the bruises ached, when the insults rang in her ears, when her heart felt too heavy to carry. She remembered her children's soft voices, their bright eyes, and their unconditional love. They were her reason to keep going, to keep trying, to keep hoping. But even then, a quiet fear lived in her heart. What if this pain never ended? What if her children grew up thinking this was what love looked like? What if silence was no longer enough to protect them? That evening changed everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. Kadia had prepared yam stew, the children had played in the field, and the sun was slowly setting over the village. But Damozi came home with a storm in his eyes. No one knew what had triggered his anger this time. Maybe it was the food, maybe it was a forgotten chore, or maybe it was simply the need to remind everyone of his power. Whatever the reason, his voice exploded like thunder through the house. Before Kadia could even respond, his hand struck her face with force that echoed through the clay walls. She stumbled, falling to the ground. Her cheek turned red and swollen instantly. The children stood frozen, their small eyes wide with shock. For the first time, the violence wasn't hidden behind closed doors. It was raw, loud, and terrifying, and it happened right in front of them. Tunai, now 10 years old, felt something shift inside him. He had seen bruises on his mother before, had heard her cries late at night, but watching her fall right before his eyes filled him with a burning rage. He clenched his fists so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His young heart didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing. This wasn't love. Jomo, only 7, couldn't hold back his tears. He ran to little Sewa and hugged her tightly, shielding her eyes from the terrible sight. The house that once held laughter was now soaked in silence and fear. That night, as Kadia lay in bed with ice on her swollen cheek and tears drying in the corners of her eyes, her children sat beneath the old baobab tree in the backyard. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them was heavy. Finally, Jomo asked in a trembling voice, "Why does Baba hurt Mama?" Tunai looked up at the stars with a fierce expression, far too mature for his age. "Because he thinks no one will stop him," he said quietly. "But he's wrong." There was a pause. Then Tunai stood up and added, "We must do something. We will expose him." Those words marked the beginning of something powerful. The children were tired of pretending, tired of watching their mother suffer. They were small, but their hearts were brave. They didn't know exactly how they would do it yet, but a plan was forming in Tunai's mind, a way to let the world see the truth behind the respected Chief Damozi. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they also knew that silence only made monsters stronger, and they were done being silent. The children knew they couldn't wait any longer. After that terrible night, something had awakened in them. Tunai, wise beyond his years, came up with a plan. Every evening, after their chores were done and Damozi had left for council meetings, the 3 children would quietly slip out of the house and gather beneath the old mango tree of Kula. It stood tall and strong, just like the courage growing inside them. This tree became their secret meeting place, a space where their whispers could not be heard, where their pain could become purpose. There, they started recording everything. They used an old-school notebook, torn and faded, but powerful in its mission. Every time Damozi raised his hand or broke a dish in anger, they wrote it down. Every time they saw a bruise on their mother's body, they noted the day, the time, and the reason he gave for his cruelty. Even the smallest screams were counted. That notebook became their voice, silent but ready to shout when the time was right. They also started drawing small sketches. Since little Sewa couldn't write yet, but wanted to help, she would draw pictures of Mama crying or of Baba's angry face. Those innocent drawings held more truth than any spoken word. One day, Tunai approached Auntie Luma, their kind neighbor, who often brought firewood and herbs to Kadia. She had seen the pain in Kadia's eyes for years, but like most villagers, she was too afraid to speak. When Tunai showed her the notebook, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "But I was scared. He's a councilman. No one would believe me." But Tunai looked her in the eye and said, "They will believe us when they see the truth." That moment sparked a change in Auntie Luma. She started gathering more information, stories from other women in the village who had once suffered in silence. Some had been mistreated by Damozi when they were younger. Others had seen things but kept quiet out of fear. Slowly, whispers turned into confessions. Pain that had been buried began to rise like smoke in the air. To the rest of the village, the children looked like they were playing beneath the mango tree, laughing, drawing, scribbling in a notebook. But in truth, they were building a storm of truth, of justice. of voices that had been ignored for too long. The tree that once gave only fruit now became the root of a revolution, and soon the village of Mabenga would know the real face of the man they called chief. The day came when silence had to end. Tunai had spent nights thinking, worrying, wondering if anyone would believe them, but he knew deep inside that the truth, once shared, could not be ignored. With his heart pounding in his chest, he walked to the village council hall, holding a letter wrapped tightly in palm leaves. His small hands trembled, but his spirit was strong. The council hall was full of elders, and villagers gathered for a meeting. Tunai stepped forward quietly and placed the letter on the elders' table without saying a word. The room fell silent. Eyes turned to him, confused, curious. Elder Maseko, the oldest and wisest man in the village, slowly unwrapped the letter and began to read. The letter held powerful truth, handwritten notes of abuse, names of women who had suffered quietly, sketches by little Sewa showing the horror at home, and a list of broken moments the children had carefully collected under the mango tree of Kula. Gasps filled the air. The image of Demosi hitting Kadia, a drawing by a child, spoke louder than any words. The elders exchanged shocked glances. Could it really be true? The same Demosi who stood in front of them every week speaking about honor and unity. Elder Maseko stood slowly and looked around the room. "This is no small matter," he said firmly. "We must investigate. We cannot ignore what has been brought before us." Word spread like wildfire through the village. Some villagers were in disbelief. Others nodded quietly, admitting they had long suspected something wasn't right. Demosi, proud and unaware of what had just happened, walked into the council hall only to meet the heavy silence and accusing eyes of his fellow elders. And then, something no one expected happened. Kadia walked in. Her hands were trembling, her eyes watery, but she stood tall. She looked at Demosi, then turned to face the elders. Her voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger with every word. "I have lived in fear. I have cried in silence. I thought I was weak, but my children have shown me what true strength looks like. I will not stay silent anymore." The entire room was frozen in awe. Kadia's words hit harder than any judgment. The woman who once hid behind smiles was now standing boldly, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been hurt and silenced. It was a turning point. The village of Mabenga had seen the truth, and there was no turning back. The day of the village council hearing arrived, and the entire village of Mabenga gathered beneath the large baobab tree where justice was served. The air was tense, and whispers filled the space like buzzing bees. No one had ever seen such a gathering before. The proud councilman Demosi, who once sat at the highest seat of authority, now stood accused, not by outsiders, but by his own family, his own blood, and the voices of the people he had once oppressed in silence. One by one, the women stepped forward. Naria, a soft-spoken widow, shared how Demosi had once threatened her when she refused to obey his selfish demands. Iluki, a young mother, revealed how he had insulted and humiliated her when she asked for support in a community project. And then came a shocking revelation. Mama Olake, the respected village herbalist, spoke up with tears in her eyes. She told the council that Demosi had once tried to force himself on her inside her own sacred shrine, a place no man had ever dared to defile. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Eyes turned cold with rage and disbelief. Every story was like a blow, tearing down the perfect mask Demosi had worn for so many years. But the most powerful moment came when the children took the stage. Tunai stepped forward, standing straight and strong like a warrior. His small voice rang with truth and pain, shaking the hearts of every adult present. "My Baba is a councilman," he said, "but in our home, he is a tyrant. He shouts, he beats, he destroys. We have seen it. We have lived it. We will not be silent anymore." Jomo stood beside him, holding little Sewa's hand, her eyes filled with confusion, but her heart full of courage. The drawing she had made was held high by Elder Maseko, showing everyone the innocence that had been broken. Even Chief Awande, Demosi's own cousin and biggest supporter, could no longer defend him. His face turned pale as truth crushed every lie he had ever believed. After hours of testimonies and silence heavy with pain, the council stood and made their final decision. Elder Maseko's voice was steady and firm as he declared, "Demosi is no longer fit to serve. His title is stripped. His power is gone. He has failed the people and his family." Cheers and tears mixed in the air. For the first time in years, Mabenga breathed freely again. Justice had spoken, and this time, it listened to the voices that had been ignored for far too long. After Demosi's downfall, a new chapter began in Kadia's life. The woman who once lived in silence and pain now stood tall with dignity and purpose. The village women, inspired by her strength, gathered around her with open arms and open hearts. Together, they built something powerful, a place where pain could turn into healing and silence into strength. They called it Zawadi House, meaning a gift, because that's exactly what Kadia had become, a gift of hope to the broken. Zawadi House became a safe haven center for women and children who had suffered abuse. Kadia used her own story not to dwell in pity, but to inspire. She trained women in raffia weaving, the same craft that once gave her peace during her darkest days. She taught them to use their hands to rebuild their lives. The mats they created were sold across villages, and soon the women earned their own money, some for the first time in their lives. But Kadia didn't stop there. She brought in volunteer teachers to educate young girls. She believed that knowledge was the strongest shield against oppression. Girls who once stayed home in silence now read books, raised their hands in class, and dreamed of becoming leaders. The change in the community was powerful. People who once whispered behind closed doors now spoke boldly against abuse. Elders who once stayed silent now praised Kadia's work. She was no longer just a woman who survived. She had become a voice of justice. She didn't need to fight with fists. She healed with her actions, her compassion, and her unwavering courage. Kadia was invited to speak at village councils. Her words, once trembling, now carried power and wisdom. During festivals, she was honored with dance and song. The same villagers who once pitied her now celebrated her as a leader, a healer, and a warrior of peace. Her children walked with pride too. Tunai became a young advocate, teaching other boys to respect women and speak up when they see wrong. Jomo loved writing stories about strong women like his mother, and Sewa, the little one, always said she wanted to be brave like Mama when she grew up. What began as pain turned into purpose. What started with tears turned into triumph. Kadia, once broken, had risen like a phoenix from the ashes, and this time she was flying high, not just for herself, but for every silent soul waiting to be free. Demosi thought he could return to his former glory. He believed his name, his family's legacy, and his past power would make the villagers welcome him again. But things had changed. The people of Mabenga had seen his true face, and they were no longer blinded by his title. Doors that once opened for him were now shut. Where he once walked with pride and arrogance, he now walked in shame and loneliness. He tried to speak at village meetings, but no one listened. He tried to gather support, but even his old allies turned their backs on him. He had become a symbol of disgrace, a man brought down not by an enemy, but by his own cruelty. Slowly, Damosi became a wanderer. The same hands that once signed council papers now stretched out in the market, begging for food. The same mouth that once shouted orders now mumbled for mercy. And while Damosi faded into the background, Kadia continued to shine. She stood tall, like the mighty baobab tree, her roots strong, and her branches stretching far into the future. Her children grew wiser and stronger each day, carrying the values of courage, justice, and love. They never forgot what their mother endured, but they also never forgot how she rose above it all with grace and strength. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, little Sewa would look at her mother and ask softly, "Mama, are you still afraid of him?" And Kadia would smile gently, not with bitterness, but with peace in her heart. "I fear no man whose soul is weaker than a child's heart," she would say, her eyes shining with quiet victory. The village often remembered Kadia's story. It became a lesson passed from mouth to mouth, from elders to children, a lesson that even the strongest abuser will fall when the truth rises. That pain may be silent for a time, but it speaks louder when spoken through innocent voices. That no cruelty, no matter how powerful, can defeat the strength of a mother's love and the courage of her children. And so, the story of Kadia and her children lived on, not just as a tale of pain, but as a powerful reminder that justice may take time, but when it comes, it roars like thunder. And when it roars, no one, not even a once powerful man like Demosi, can escape its sound. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. How many voices are still silenced behind closed doors? How many mothers cry in silence? And how many children are forced to grow up too soon? Let Kadia's strength remind us that no pain should be hidden, and no abuse should be ignored. Together, we must raise our voices for every woman, every child, and every soul suffering in silence. If you believe in justice, if you believe in hope, if you believe in change, then help us spread this powerful message. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories like this one. Your support helps us keep telling these stories that matter, stories that inspire, empower, and heal. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us. Stay strong, stay kind, and never stop believing in the power of truth.